Welcome back to your D132 to our vector tracing exercise called E-tracing. And in part one, we did sans serif typefaces with the letter E. And now we're going to use serif typefaces, which you'll find out have a lot more detail to them. And will make things a little more challenging, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you make a mess of it, don't get too worried about it. But we're going to start with this E here. And you can always simplify it first and then add more later. So that's what I'll try to do. So I'm going to zoom in here. So I'm kind of isolating this. I'm doing Command plus. On my laptop, it's 200%. Now, we're going to be using these same tools again. So I'm going to click on here, and I'll just find a corner, and I'm going to click. And these are not straight lines. I just want to point out, they're not straight lines. So if you click and drag a little, you could bend it just slightly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on each point so that it doesn't make this big curve, because you're not going to need a big curve like that. So just click on the point where you end it there. That's the point. So just click on it. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit more and kind of scroll up there. And I'm just going to click and drag a little just to make a little curve. And then click on the point again. I want you to see that that little serif there is rounded. Now this isn't angled. It actually goes in a little groove here. So I'm actually going to go here and click, and then I'm going to go here and click and drag and make just a little kind of indentation so you can see it's rounded. That's all I want to do, is just get you to see how these fonts are composed. So if you drive yourself crazy, that's okay. Now I'll zoom out a little, do Command minus, and I'll just lay it down as far as I can go. Now you can see it's not perfectly straight, but I'm going to go down as far as I can go and then click. And then I'll zoom in again, and I'll scroll down, and I'll just kind of break the difference here. See, it curves here, so I'm going to go over here, and then I'll click and drag in this direction out to the foot. Just a little like that, just to make that little curved bevel there. And then I'll click on this because I don't want a handle coming out. So I'll click, and then I'll click again. And see, this isn't straight. If I just clicked, it would be straight. And if I click and drag, I could give it just a little kind of roundedness to that edge. And then I'll click on here again, and I'll click, and then I'll click. You don't have to smooth that out. I'm just going to make an angle there, and I'll click, and I'll click. Now you can see it does bevel in a little bit. It does curve in a little bit. So if you were trying to be really accurate, you would actually click and drag and make that come in ever so slightly. And then I'll click on this point, and then I'll click and make that rounded, and then I'll click here. Now we have this kind of slope coming down. So I'm going to go over here and try and get that slope. And I could actually continue this all the way over here, right to about here. I'll click, and then I'll break the difference here, click and drag, make a little indentation. I'll go up here, I'll just go straight. I'll go over here, click and drag, go up a little to put it back in. And you can see there's no good place to lay it down here, so I'm just going to click on that. And I'll click, and I'll split the difference. See, here's where it curves, but I'll go over here, and then I'll kind of click and drag. And then I don't want a curve here, so I'll click on the point to get rid of that forward handle. Now I'm just making a straight line. I'll click, I'll go here, I'll click and drag a little to make a little curve, then click on the point again, click to make a straight line, click and drag to make a little arch. Now let me show you something. I'm going to undo that. If you were like, I don't like that clicking dragging, I'm just going to make it straight. And if you're like, I'm just going to make it straight, and I'm going to just make it straight, and I'm just going to 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 make it straight. And if you're like, screw this, I'm tired of making all these curves, I'm just going to make them straight. What you could do, here's a weird little thing that you can do. You can go to this bend tool, and you could go right on the path, and you could bend it after the fact. And I could go up here and bend it after the fact. And I could go over here, and I could bend it in. And I could bend this a little bit. And I could bend this out a little. And I could bend this in a little. So you could actually make straight lines, but I guess I was trying to show you how they are kind of made up. So there's a lot of little subtleties in this. Now this one, now that's vector 1. Let's just rename it, the first one that we had there, vector 1. We're just going to call it E serif, because it was a serif E. So we'll call it serif E. So once you're done with this and you named it, we have to hit done. Because remember, we don't want to work on two of the same. So you're done with that. That's called E serif. Make sure you click off of it. Now what we're going to go do is trace this one. Now we could try that method of bending things. So I think what I'll do here is just start at a corner and I'll click and I'll click and I'll skip over the little nose of the E there, that little tip. I'll skip over it. I'll go up here and I'll still click and drag up here. Get that nice arch, and I'll lay it down on here as nice as I can. That looks really nice. Then I'll go down here and I have to do a click and drag again. So I'll click and drag and try to bend that back. And I'll try to lay it down on here as best I can. Might be a little too much. That's okay, we could shorten it later. I'll click, and watch this. I'm gonna try and just go over here and click. Click. All right, now I'm going to take this bend tool and I'm going to just pull out, go on that line and just bend that out a little, round it off, and I'll try to bend this one in a little best I can. Now we're going to have to adjust the handles and then go back to the arrow, the move tool, and click on this point so you see some of these handles, and I'll just shorten this because I don't want, trying to shorten it a little bit, and I'll shorten maybe that a little, because I don't want that in there. And then this one, if I click on that one, always click on a joining point to see the handles, and I'll kind of bend that in and kind of bend this out a little, and that's not too bad. If you wanted to zoom in and really like round off this end, you can take the bend tool and kind of bend it out slightly. Then I'll zoom out again, and that's not bad. And I'm going to skip that for now. Let's just skip it. Now I'm going to hit done, and then go here and call this E serif. I'll call it regular. And we won't do the compound path right now, just because you might be going crazy with some of these things. We'll try it down here. Let's try this. Let's try working on a new one here. Now make sure you already hit done and you're on a new one. So let's try this a little bit. Just see how this works. We're going to go here, start at a corner. We have this big curve here, so I'm just going to click and drag. Click and drag. That looks good. Now I'll go over here. Now you can see it's going to be too much, but I'll go right about here. I'll click once, and now I could have clicked and dragged, but I clicked once. Now I got to do another click and drag, and I'm dragging down. And you can see I have like a point there, so that's not what I want, but I'll have to fix that later. And I'll click here once it kind of wraps around the bottom of this E a little bit. I'll click. And then I'll click, and then I'll click. Now this is a very sharp area, so you might actually click twice. You might click here and click here. Why would you do that? Then you could go to this bend tool and kind of bend that in a little, and you could bend this down. Sometimes the bend is really hard to control if it's a really big curve, so I'll bend that down. I'll bend this one down. I don't remember if that was straight or not. I'll have to look at it. And this one, I'm going to bend out on that. I'm just actually using the bend tool and smoothing it, because what it does is it converts it to mirror angle and length. And that's actually pretty good. Now get off of this and just kind of bring it back a little and shorten that. And shorten that. You see, this is not easy. Again, I don't want it to be super easy. I don't want it to be something that drives you crazy either. And that's why I'm not having you do the insides of these, because it just becomes a problem to make it a compound path and all that. But that's fine for now. I'm going to hit done, and I'm going to call that E serif italic, because it's the italic version. So I'm going to call that E serif italic because it's the italic version of the E. You can see it's very different than that version. It's not just skewed, it has a whole different shape. That's why we had to redraw it again. And we now have the E italic, the E regular, and that one. So we have the 3 separate ones and we have the sans ones. So if you want to just fill them, you could just kind of click on that, take away the stroke, give it a fill. Give it a, maybe you'll make these a different color, green. There we go. I'll make this green, take away the stroke, plus sign for the fill, and I'll go to the fill and I'll use this green. Now I didn't do the inside, that's okay. If you want to do the inside, but some of you haven't worked with this before and I know it could be really challenging, so if you just get the outside, that's okay. I'll hit minus on the stroke, I'll hit plus on the fill, click on this little swatch down here and make it green, and see how that goes. And then you're done with the ex3. So if you struggle with these, if you're like, I tried and I just made a mess out of it, it's okay. Just want you to get used to how these vector tools, how these vector paths actually create these letters. That's how they're actually created. They're created out of these outline shapes. And actually, if you broke apart an actual font, you'll see that it has a lot more anchor points than we have here. We're just trying to keep it more simplified so we don't have so many anchor points to work with. But real fonts have, a lot of times they'll have a lot of different anchor points around there. And we'll look at it a little bit more as we do that. Matter of fact, if I just go here, I'll right click and do outline stroke. Now if I go in here, you can see all this stuff in here. So you can see there's more than we did, and we certainly wouldn't want to be doing that because then it's harder to create all that. But that's how it's actually created. That's how that stroke is actually created from all these vector paths. So any typeface that we use is based on this. We're just kind of doing it manually to look at it. So I'll hit done here. So that's just an example of how all these paths here are vector paths. So when you read about that, how they became outline paths in Illustrator, you can take these and turn them into logos and manipulate them any way you want, but it's not easy. Working with vector is not easy, but that's why we're doing a little practice here. So hopefully you did okay with that. If you struggle, just do as much as you can. Maybe you were only able to do the straight lines, or maybe you just got to this one and then you struggled with that. Now these are a little tough, and these are a little tough, but maybe that idea of clicking and then doing the bend tool after, maybe I should have done that sooner with some of this stuff here. But anyway, that's ex3. When you're done, how much ever that you get done, when you're happy with it, you could just hit share and hit copy link and then go back to your assignment and just share it with me. Add a comment, add a link, paste it in here, new window, and then hit save. And then hit save again, and you're done. So that was a pretty challenging vector assignment for early on. And part of it's just because Figma is a little bit different. Different programs work differently with vectors, and there's some little odd things about Figma that make it a little challenging for some of this tracing kind of stuff. Some of it's easier, some of it's a little harder. Some of it's easier the way it lays it right on the path, some of it's harder. Guaranteed, I don't think it would be much easier in Illustrator if we did that. But anyway, that's our ex3 e-tracing, and hopefully you had fun with that, or you're very frustrated. Talk to you soon.